Howdy, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of the Psych Tech at Work podcast. I am your host, Dr. Charles Handler. I always love having fellow podcasters on the show. My guest today is the host of the Recruiting Future podcast and the author of the book Digital Talent. He is none other than Matt Alder. And today, Matt and I's conversation covers a bunch of relevant topics. It's great to get his perspective on things like digital transformation. What does that actually mean? I didn't know until we had this conversation exactly what the term meant. So we'll learn about that. We'll talk, obviously, about skills-based hiring, because who isn't talking about that? Matt has some amazing perspectives on that. The overall mindset that one needs when adopting HR technology, hiring-related technology, especially today in the age of AI. And we'll prognosticate together about what hiring and recruiting is going to look like 10 years from now. I guarantee you, whatever we think it is, it's going to be different, because how could it not be? We never could have predicted even 3 or 4 years ago what's going on now. So we'll talk about the perfunctory generative AI applications to what we do. This show also has a landmark in that it is the first time that I have included the Take It or Leave It segment. And this is a really cool piece where Matt and I will review a couple of timely articles, and we'll upvote and downvote those articles and give our take on why we do that. So make sure to stick around for that. Before we dive into today's show, a selfless, shameless plug for me and what I can do for your organization. A lot of people who listen may not know exactly what it is that I do, and you need to know, because if you're considering anything around the adoption of talent assessment, there's a lot of hard decisions that need to be made, and you need an expert in your corner. For over 30 years, I've been helping organizations globally understand who they are and choose the ideal talent assessment partner and program for their needs. I take a really disciplined approach that focuses around legal compliance, candidate experience, and business results. We combine those things in a very personalized program to help make sure organizations make the right choices. And today, in the age of AI, you need somebody who's an expert in your corner. There's so many advantages that these tools can have, but there's a lot of pitfalls too. So if you're looking at a talent assessment program, implementing, choosing, validating, etc., give me a call. I'm here to help. So without further ado, let's welcome our all-star guest for today, Matt Alder. Hi, Matt. Welcome to the Psych Tech at Work show. How you doing today?
I'm doing really well, and thank you very much for having me on your show. It's always good to be on someone else's podcast for a change.
Yeah, well, you are really what we call, OG as far as podcasting goes, and Matt is the host of the Recruiting Future podcast, one that I listen to a lot. I think we both share the passion for being futurists and the passion for talent acquisition and hiring. So looking forward to our conversation today. We also have, hang in there, listeners and watchers, we have a brand new segment called Take It or Leave It, where we review some current articles and talk about some trends. So that'll be a lot of fun. That'll be in the middle of the show. So let's get started though. Matt, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background. I believe you're in Scotland, correct?
That's right. Yes, I do live in Scotland. It's actually sunny today here, which is great. I've been in Scotland for about 10 years, and it is a lovely place to live. So if anyone's never been, I definitely recommend visiting. In terms of me, I've been working in and around talent acquisition for 25 years now, which is a very long time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And kind of done all sorts of things. I started my career in recruitment marketing. So I ran 2 big digital teams in 2 recruitment marketing agencies. Since then, done a lot of work as a consultant in this space. And for the last 9 years, I've been running the Recruiting Future podcast.
Very cool. So I have been to Scotland a long time ago, and it was great. I was 10. We lived in London when I was 10 for a while. I was obsessed with the Loch Ness Monster, so my parents were cool enough to take me to Loch Ness, and I burned about several rolls of camera film photographing logs and other such things floating around, but it was pretty cool. And I haven't been back though. So let's see. I don't want to be too stereotypical about Scotland. I do love bagpipes. I do love Scotch, and I do love golf. So there's a lot of good stuff there. What about haggis?
Absolutely.
What about haggis? Is haggis more like a ceremonial meal?
No, it's a legitimate food item. You tend to get it on cooked breakfasts. So a Scottish cooked breakfast has got haggis on it.
Yeah.
And also a lot of restaurants have a favouring towards making haggis bonbons, so kind of battering it into little balls.
Yeah.
It's good. I've always liked it. Liked it. It's not a myth. It's a proper thing.
Yeah. I've had it only. Why I said ceremonial. My friend had a wedding. He's Scottish heritage, so they had one. He cut it with a sword, and I ate some. It's oatmeal in there, right? Is that right? Is it oatmeal stuff in there?
And various bits of sheep.
Gotcha. Yeah, bits of sheep. That's nice. Well, there's a lot of sheep there. So very cool. And last piece about Scotland, I promise. Where do you live in Scotland?
I live just outside Edinburgh, so right on a little town on the beach. So so it's great.
Yep, I have been to Edinburgh. That was one of my other places. Good. So let's get going a little bit here. You've talked about your background a little bit in your podcast, and I encourage everybody to listen to that podcast. I do quite a bit, and it's really educational, as a lot of the good ones are. So tell us a little bit more about it. Kind of what inspired you to do it? Because 9 years, that's a long time. If you look at a graph of the number of podcasts that are out there, my guess is it's kind of flat for a little while, and now it's almost got a direct vertical launch, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I started it because I was mainly working as a consultant. I was having some fascinating conversations with people, either the clients that I was working with or the research that I was doing into what was going on in the sector, what was going on in other sectors, where was innovation coming from. And I've always liked audio. So I've always liked audio. And at the time I had a blog that had the same name, Recruiting Future. And it just kind of struck me that I might enjoy recording a podcast more than I enjoyed writing a blog, which was true. But also, I thought it would be great to do my research in public. So I was having these great conversations, and it just seemed to be a waste of really good insights that I could share with a wider audience. So I started the podcast on that basis to share those conversations and really, try and start more of a debate about the future of recruitment, the future of hiring, the future of talent acquisition. I think back then everything was about social media. That was the technology innovation of the day. And I just think it's kind of really important to have those conversations. And now the podcast is really about helping people who work in talent acquisition by showing them what else is going on in the industry, what some of their peers are doing. And very often, I think you find that people aren't as far ahead as you thought they were when you kind of look at what people are doing. But at the same time, there's some great ideas on there. I'm always looking for people with new stories to tell, and I look outside the industry as well. I look at what's going on generally in business and what can we learn from other sectors, other areas of the enterprise. And I think it's really important to have that kind of future-facing, outward-looking view on things, and that's what the podcast is all about.
Yeah, and it's so important to pull in. I mean, we're increasingly multidisciplinary, right? It takes a lot of people to make stuff happen from different disciplines, but also those perspectives, and you hear a lot about, I think it's interesting from a talent acquisition standpoint. Oh, we hired an anthropologist to join our product team, and they brought all these amazing ideas. That's just I randomly pulled that, but there's stuff like that going on, which I think is fantastic. That kind of diversity of thought is really essential. So I try to do, the same thing, and a podcast is such a great way to expose people in our field to some of this ancillary stuff. It's so important to kind of expand our minds. And you've also written at least one. I think we'll talk about your latest book here in a little while, but tell us a little bit about the other stuff that you do, because doing a podcast, we wish it was lucrative enough to support ourselves, but it is absolutely probably not. So what other things are you doing? Let's start with the book and then talk a little bit about kind of your practice as well.
Yeah, sure. So I've written two books. I've co-authored them with my good friend Mervyn Dinnan. The first one was out about 5 years ago, and it was called Exceptional Talent. And what we sort of looked at, what we talked about in that book was the joining together of the employee experience. So
Mm-hmm.
we were saying that from an employee's perspective, they work for a company. That's what they do. From the HR perspective, they're dealt with by talent management, by onboarding, by learning development, by just all of these different silos. So it was looking at how eventually all those parts of the kind of the employee life cycle would work together and really give people that sort of great experience. And the purpose of that was to help organizations get exceptional talent into their
Mm-hmm.
businesses. So that was the first book, and then we followed that up about 3 years later. So it came about 2 years ago with digital talent, and we just kind of took that theme a bit further, and we looked at all the digital transformation that was going on. We looked at the fact that employers were needing completely new skills in their business that
Yeah.
they'd not had before. And again, skills that were very difficult to find, very difficult to retain. So we kind of looked at that life cycle in terms of, through that digital lens and said,
Mm-hmm.
what about work's changing? What do we need as what do you need as an organization to make sure that you have, you're kind of reinventing the talent you have in the organization and the skills you have in the organization for this digital future. And that's what the second book was about.
Oh, very, very cool. I mean, needed stuff. When you talk about employee experience, the light bulb just kind of went off in my head of how, and I'd never thought about it this way, how directly linked that is to psychology, right? The psychology of the workplace, what you experience as an employee, the support, the psychological safety, the recognition, the sometimes non-recognition, whatever happens, that's really going to form a lot of important bonds around how committed you are to an organization, how productive you are, how happy you are, right? So my mission is you put the right person in the right job, the individual is happy, and the organization benefits, and that's what work should be all about. But because we're people and everybody's different, and we have so many individual differences and contexts different, it's really hard to do that at scale all the time, right? That's why people like us exist,
Yeah.
right? So to help companies figure that out. So that's important stuff. I had a thought. You used the term digital transformation. I hear that term a lot, and I may not be somebody who
Yeah.
has pushed a digital transformation, but if you had to define digital transformation, especially in the context of what we do, what's that all about? Tell our listeners.
Yeah, so it's a very broad term that's used
Uh-huh.
for lots of different things. I suppose at the most general level, it's about companies having to adjust to an ever more digital world. So
Right.
in terms of how they sell their products and services, what
Yep.
their products and services are, who their
Yep.
audience is, and how they
Mm-hmm.
consume them, and that obviously moves all the way back into the talent that they have in their organization. And I think that the pandemic was a great lens to sort of look at all this through, because
Yeah.
lots of businesses had to digitally transform overnight, and even
Mm-hmm.
businesses that thought they would never have to go down this path. So for example, theatre companies
Yeah.
suddenly having to deliver their performances digitally, and you think about all the skills that are needed in that. You have to know how do you film this to get the essence of that performance. How do you market it? What technology do we use? So I think that was kind of a great example of digital transformation just happening almost instantly. And the pandemic was definitely a catalyst for it as well, because many organizations learned to do things digitally and haven't moved back from that. And it
Yeah.
continues. I think that AI is another, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later, is another factor that's fueling it. And we're sort of seeing it in more and more, we would have called in traditional businesses, are being affected by the move to the digital everything, which is
Yeah.
going on. So it will continue. So it's that. I think it's particularly applicable to older companies who are having to change what they do. They might be competing with newer startups who've just started in a digital first world. So it's that transformation, but I think it has a really big impact on talent and skills.
Yeah. I mean, if you're not doing that, you are swimming against the current, or maybe you'll just get washed away by the current. I don't know, but it's like become something that everybody must do better, probably not kicking and screaming, but there's lots to figure out, right? I mean, as you start tripping into the realm of AI, I mean, there's the dilemmas are not crystal clear. The answers are not crystal clear. For me, it's about a couple of things. Creativity, balancing efficiency with responsibility, right? And it's about experimentation, tinkering around, trying stuff, I believe, right? And I think companies that are doing those things and thinking forward a little bit are going to come up with answers that may not have always even been rightly apparent. In other cases, vendors are putting stuff out there and you see that and you're like, oh, that's available? I had no idea. Let's give that a try. Do you have an example of something in your realm that you feel like this is a great story of how some organization or individual at that organization was able to kind of personify this idea of digital transformation?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting area, and I think to sort of speak to your earlier points, really being future focused and having the right mindset as you approach the future is a critical part of that. I mean, I think there are loads of examples, but if we kind of look at talent acquisition and let's look at some really kind of up to date things that are
Yeah.
happening. Obviously, everyone is obsessed with talking about AI at the moment, but there's a question about how many people are actually doing something with it, and can we
Yeah.
do anything with it, or do we have to wait for the products and services to develop or it to be incorporated in some of the things that we do? But on my podcast a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed the deputy director of talent acquisition for HMRC, which is the UK tax office. So it stands for
Mm-hmm.
His Majesty's Revenue and Customs, or something like that. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
so the tax office, not the place that you would expect to be a hotbed of innovation. But what had happened is their recruitment team had done a lot of experimentation with the current capabilities of the generative AI they have access to, and built some pretty cool systems. Built some systems that were designed to save hiring manager time, to promote consistency in things like job descriptions across the organization, deliver talent intelligence in a consistent way. And it just kind of showed you these were non-technical people with no budget who've managed to build a platform that probably 5 years ago someone would be selling you for $100,000 or something
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that. And I think that's a great example of having that future focused mindset and playing with these tools, but really thinking about the problems that they solve and how it's going to take their business forward. And I think with anything to do with digital transformation, it's not just taking what you currently do and trying to reinvent it and trying to just transfer it into the digital realm. Is actually looking at what are the benefits, what are the advantages, how can we just tear our thinking down about this is the always the way that we've done this,
Yeah.
and build it up again and say, well, actually now what's possible, and why would we do that if we don't have to do it? And I think it's a great thing for recruiting as a whole, because I think if you look at the obsession with resumes and unstructured interviews and all of these things that are just habits and tradition, that kind of is challenging in the new world that we're moving into. And I hope that happens. So I think it's really having a mindset that challenges the status quo, looks to the future, experiments, isn't afraid to fail, but fail quickly, and make things better for everyone. I think that would be a way of encapsulating it.
Yeah, and in your example, one thing I thought of as you were talking about it is, in my experience, it's great to have an opportunity, which is not very common, to start from the ground up. You got nothing, and you're going to build this out,
Yeah.
because what we find is in HR technology, things are siloed. You have different vendors. There's not a lot of communication. So as you start to think about a transformation, and you've got all these existing systems, it's hard to burn those to the ground and start back, right? So, and there's a lot
Exactly.
of stakeholders that are invested in certain technologies and such. It makes it really hard. I think that's why that's a barrier, right? And I don't have an answer to overcome that. If you're a brand new startup or something, maybe you get that opportunity, and that's to me a good one. I see that a little bit in, I don't know if this is a perfect example or anything, but one of the things I notice, right, is I feel like HR technology of any sort that touches especially applicants needs to be providing a consumer grade experience. It needs to look like your banking, it needs to look like your social media, which means constantly updating your UI and to some extent your UX. In the assessment world, most established companies, that's the last thing on their list. So sometimes you can see a real
Yeah.
incongruity. And as an applicant, especially now that applicants are expecting to be able to use technology in the workplace, the younger they are, probably the more they will. You have an incongruous experience like that, and it's not good for your employment brand, but it doesn't really get changed because there's so many moving parts. Whereas if I'm a startup and I just start yesterday, I can get my UI and UX pretty nice, and hopefully I'm building things in there to make it easy to change those things. So that's kind of my
Yeah.
example. It's a micro example compared to the big stuff.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I think it's one of the problems that it's one of the problems that we face as a sector. What I think is interesting moving forward though, is I think during the pandemic proved that actually if there's a compelling reason to make those changes can be made really quickly. So
Yeah.
again, if you think about recruitment processes changed overnight to embrace video interviewing because they just had to.
Mm-hmm.
And while obviously it's incredibly important for employer brand and employee experience to have that consumer grade experience,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to have become, it doesn't seem to be the compelling reason that we think it should be.
Yeah.
However, now that you have armies of job seekers who have access to AI and they're able to apply to, put out great applications to lots of jobs at the same time, I have a feeling it will start to break these systems.
Yeah.
And if you've got all, if you can't distinguish between, if you've got 10,000 applications, they all look the same, then you kind of have to take a step back and say, do you know what? We need to reinvent the way that we do this
Mm-hmm.
because we can't fix this. This is not a problem that we can fix. We cannot put things in place to stop people using AI or all this sort of stuff. The answer is to actually take a step back and say, is this working for us anyway? How could we reinvent this process? How can we make it more personalized and give people that experience and actually get what we need from it? So I have a feeling we're heading towards one of those points. I could be wrong. Everything I'm seeing so far would indicate that
Yeah.
that is the case. I think then organizations will have that compelling reason to change and reinvent what they do.
Yeah, all you got to do is ask ChatGTP. Redesign my recruiting process to make sure that we can differentiate between applicants. I'm sure it'll
the answer's out there somewhere, isn't it?
Yeah, somewhere. If you
Um,
think about the
yeah.
whole
But
internet.
I think you won't solve the problem
No.
by trying to tweak the current
No.
process. I think
Yeah.
that's the thing. It's like you
Yeah.
have to rethink it.
I know, and the way technology is moving so quickly, it's like it's a little scary to think of how often you might have to rethink it, as things change. But it's also there's a difference between, being in the Stone Age and not. So that part of it's going to get really interesting, really really. It already is in my career.
Totally.
You think about the things that have been kind of the hot topics or whatever, the zeitgeist of the time, things that I honestly have, most of them, been a little skeptical of. Of course, social media, assessment games that don't look like the job, the metaverse, blockchain, all these are important things, but they haven't had the revolutionary impact that they get hyped up to be. But generative AI is. It is, I feel like.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think there's so much hype around lots of things, and there's lots of hype about generative AI, which is off the scale hype.
Oh my gosh, it's crazy.
However, I think that anyone who is using it can see an instant benefit, and I think that's the difference between that and the metaverse, for example. You don't have to buy a headset and stick
exactly.
It on. You can actually just you can see an instant benefit from it, even if that benefit doesn't live up to the current hype. And I think that's what makes the difference. I think you have people arguing about the the scale at which it's going to change things, but I don't think anyone's
Hmm.
arguing about the fact that it will change things.
Yeah, yeah, it's hard to know, but I just recently did a project where I interviewed IO psychologists at 20 of them, probably at giant companies, in industries, every company you've heard of. They run assessment programs, which is only a micro part of the overall hiring funnel, workflow, tech stack, what have you, but an important one, obviously, from my perspective. And none of them are really doing anything different in that regard, right? They're all, okay, we're going to look at it. We're going to wait and see. Some, I asked them, does your company have a blanket policy about employees using generative AI? The spectrum there is everywhere from absolutely can't use it, but wink, wink, it might happen on my personal computer to
Yeah,
we have our
I
own
have it on my
corporate,
phone.
yeah, we have our own corporate version of ChatGTP or a large language model that everybody uses and we love it, to we don't care, just get the work done. So there's a lot of variation there, but overall, in the assessment world, there's not a lot of AI stuff being done. I think as you move higher up in the funnel to recruitment process automation and just general recruitment of sourcing and initial screening, you see a lot more of it. But that's been going on since before generative AI. That's like the last five
Yeah,
years that's been
exactly.
happening.
Yeah,
Gotcha. So as I kind of look at our show today as past, present, future, and as we kind of wind down the present part, what would your advice be? I'm a talent acquisition leader. I'm looking at the need to keep up, to safely innovate, I would call it. And I need ultimately, my thing is always, and we're there to make ourselves look good to our bosses. And we do that by performing. And even the CEO does that. The bosses are the shareholders, the board, whatever, right? We all have a boss. And so I need to do that. And because, I need to get results. And so
yeah.
what advice would you give to somebody, in that position? Maybe somebody who's listening here today.
Yeah, I think the first thing is to have that understanding about what is it you're trying to achieve, what is it your
Yeah.
company's trying to achieve, and I think you have to start with that, because there's so much noise, there's so much going on, there are so many rabbit holes to fall down. There's so much distraction. You kind of need that north star to shape it, and then the next thing really is having the right mindset. And I think that people have a lot of like cognitive bias kicking around when they look at what the future will look like. So, thinking it might stay the same, being very,
Yeah.
optimism bias, status quo bias, all these kind
Yeah.
of things. So I think it's just having that sort of habit, developing a really kind of open mind in terms of how you look at things. I think that's another aspect to it. Then it's just being really intentional with the research that you do. So really taking control of that in terms of what's going on, what do I need to experiment with, where do I need to look for this information, and not just relying on a stream of vendors coming through your door telling you
Yeah.
what's going on with things like AI. It's actually like, let's listen to some great podcasts about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I know a
that kind of
few.
stuff. I think it's that yeah, exactly. So you really have to do that research bit, look at different opinions, really think about what are people's motives for telling you this. Also, I think with AI, there is so much out there from outside talent acquisition talking about what's going to happen and all this sort of stuff. So there's some great content. So, I think that's the other important thing. And then from there, it really is about just getting started and experimenting. So
Yeah.
I think you have to have that long term view, but also you have to be hands on and experiment with it. And it's a balance, and where that balance sometimes becomes unaligned is I've seen lots of people sort of panicking and saying, right, I need to train my entire team to be prompt engineers in
Yeah.
a month's time to
Yeah.
do this. And it's like, well, okay, whoa. Why? Have you thought about what are your objectives? All that sort of stuff. And I think it's that balance between, well, where is this going to be in 2 or 3 years' time? And will we even need to write prompts? Because they'll just probably go in there automatically or
Agreed.
something. So
Agreed completely.
that would probably be a waste of time. But it's not a waste of time to actually put some time aside and experiment and see what's possible right now, and try and think about where it might go in the future. So it's a difficult balance, but it's kind of important to get that right, because I think too many people get just stuck in the
Yeah.
what's right in front of them right now, and that will change very quickly.
Yeah. I would add to that. I think that's really good insight. I would add to that. You need to understand that your candidates, and especially younger candidates, are digitally savvy. They expect to use technology in the workplace. They'll probably use technology in the application process. And in my opinion, that's okay. You need to change your process to make sure that you're meeting that. And there's some good research that I've seen. Arctic Shores, they put out pretty good little summary, and they surveyed a lot of employers and applicants. And applicants, they don't want to work for this is college, university graduates, early career. They don't want to work for a company that isn't going to let them do that, use those technologies. They expect to use them on the job. So if you're not meeting those people where they're at, you're going to have a harder time even finding the talent. So the power is in the hands, and that's what technology does. It democratizes. The power is in the hands of the job seeker in some sense, right? In that at scale, you might find it a lot harder to attract people. So
more so than it has been in the past as well.
Yeah, I think so. All right, so now we're gonna move into a little segment, the Take It or Leave It show segment. I have a whole sequence of little production things here, so hopefully this goes pretty smoothly. If not, watch again next time and it'll go more smoothly. So I'm gonna start the process here and let's see what happens, okay? All right, so we're gonna count down to the show and we'll talk a little bit about what goes on in the show here in a second. All right, so here I am. Supposed to be cueing my intro music. There we go. There we go. So a little out of sequence, but not bad. So what we're going to do, here's how the show goes. I have 2 articles. I am going to first show the actual article, but then I have a TLDR slide so that, it's going to be hard to read an article when I scroll, but for some reason, I feel like authentically it's good to actually show that the article exists. And then, Matt, you're the guest. You'll give your take on it. And it's not as much on the article, but on the subject of the article, right? And just how you think about it. And then I'll do the same, and then we'll do a little vote. Do we take it or do we leave it? That's pretty much it for this first time. So I'm going to scroll down to the first article. This is an article. Hopefully it comes up. Here we go. This is an article from Forbes magazine, and it's about skills-based hiring and basically saying, skills-based hiring is really not working right now. So if and I have strong opinions about this, I'm sure you do too. So here's the TLDR about it, right? And we can take a scan of this, and generally we'll say that there's some research here that I think is always good to see numbers, and it just looks like there's not much going on. There is a typo error in there, so we're going to ignore that, and with a bullet that doesn't go anywhere. And it just seems like people are maybe giving lip service to this, probably because it's not easy to do, and it hasn't been very successful from translating from theory to practice. So what do you think, Matt? Give us your take on this.
Yeah, I looked at the article and I don't know, the title riled me because it was just so the skills-based hiring has failed, the absoluteness of it. So I think that there is a serious point in this article. What I did though was it annoyed me so much. I went back and actually read the report that it's based on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a couple of things that come out. I mean, the first thing is, as you say, skills-based hiring isn't easy. It's it's very difficult. It's something that takes a long time. It's something that's reflected in the report that this article is about. And also, skills-based hiring isn't just removing a degree requirement from a job description. So I think that whole thing about it's failed because of this data around degrees is a bit ridiculous. The degree stuff's interesting because if you read the original report, what it says is actually 37% of the companies that they looked at who had made this announcement about removing degrees were doing really well and were making great progress with it. And it actually strikes it gives a really optimistic view about what the future looks like. So it says, this is really hard and it's easy for companies to make that statement. We are removing degrees from what we do, but it's very difficult to see that through and actually see that make a tangible difference in what the organization does. So yeah, it's not really surprising. I don't like the tone of the article at all, as you could probably tell.
Yeah.
But there is an interesting point in there. There is a point about this is hard, and actually, it's not just about making those kind of announcements. You really have to follow through in everything that you do as well.
That's a good one. I did not go back and read the article. Did extra points for attention to detail and research there. As far as I'm concerned, I love the idea of skills-based hiring. Believe me, especially as an assessment guy, because one of the things you can substitute for that educational background, etc., is a way to just measure where someone is or what their potential is for certain things. So I love it. I am not surprised to see the information here. I do think, though, 40% at where we are now, so early on in this, is not a bad number, really, to see if 40% of people are succeeding. To me, the barriers to it are not necessarily what the company is interested in or not, but there's the first barrier to me is how are you defining a skill, right? I think there's a lot of what I call empty calories in this. So if you think about some of the platforms that take job descriptions or other means, mostly job descriptions probably, and say, we're going to turn that into a cloud of words that relate to this job. If you can't measure those words, if you can't verify those words, that to me becomes difficult to execute on this, right? So companies need to not only look at those skills, but they need to find a way to not take the technology's word for it if it's just grabbing some stuff, right? So I think that part is important. And I've had a little bit of experience. I'll tell a little story. I like to do this. It's probably been 6-7 years ago. I helped a research project called the Essential Competencies Project, and it was sponsored or funded through grants by the Conference Board, which is a enterprise research company, independent. And our goal was we canvassed, I think, 20 global companies, and our goal was to get them for one job to substitute an assessment or a series of assessments for the educational background or resume part of the hiring process. And we were able to sign up 5 to pilot, and 0 of those 5 were able to actually execute because they couldn't change the hiring process, to my point earlier, to actually make it so there was an assessment and not the resume, and especially because it was one job. So I saw a great idea and some great research just completely fail because of technology and process. So for me, those are the things we need to overcome. I think the intentions are in the right place, but it is hard to execute, right? So I had kind of mixed feelings. So let's see. As far as, I think we would both vote, thumbs up on skills-based hiring, but as far as this article goes and how it did all that, what is your take? Do you take it or do you leave it?
So my initial reaction was to leave it because I say I don't like the way that the article has pitched itself. However, I'm going to take it because I think it's actually good to see articles challenging some of the aspects of skills-based hiring, because there's just so much there's a juggernaut of positive press and this is really easy. So for the fact that it's raised the point that this is hard and we're not making fast progress on it, begrudgingly, I'm going to take it. Gotcha.
I think I'm going to take it as well. And so we got a positive on this. And I agree, none of this stuff's perfect. But I like that people are being made aware of the fact that it's not easy. And if I'm going to be implementing one of these things, what can I learn from an article like this? How can I overcome those objections within my company? Just to understand, I think maybe vendors sometimes lead companies down a primrose path of thinking, oh man, we can totally get you skills-based hiring because we have all these skills and you just choose from these skills and it'll work out great. And it's not like that. So, that's how I feel. So, all right, we'll go to the second article here. Let's see. The interesting thing about this article, technology-wise, I had to change the CSS or something to change the background, but we'll talk about it. But the upshot is that there is an assessment company that uses these kind of gender-neutral, ethnicity-neutral blue aliens, and they ask job seekers, is it like me or not like me? And this is, an assessment that a lot of companies use. So this is kind of what it looks like. So now let's go to the TLDR. And, basically what they're saying is that job applicants, especially hourly scale jobs, are being asked to do this task. And the result is it's going to tell on a very common, the Big Five model of personality, where these people lie, and hopefully the company has calibrated those to what's important on the job. But sure seems like that job applicants are not thrilled about this, and there may be some questioning of the scientific basis, of this. So, what is your take, Matt?
Again, my take on it is I didn't like the article. I think it plays on the fact that the visuals look very strange out of context, and
Yep.
it puts a whole negative spin on it. So it's asking questions about the scientific basis of all of this, but it actually isn't asking the company behind it what the scientific basis of it is. It's kind of sneering at the whole thing. So I didn't like it from that perspective. I do think though it raises a really important point, and I've seen this in quite a few articles about what's going on in recruitment quite recently. I think as an industry, particularly when everything's changing like it is now, we have to be so much better at educating people in terms of what's going on. Because I think if you drill down to how this has been set up and the science behind it and all those kind of things, I'm pretty confident that there's probably a very good reason and basis behind this. They're taking the views of one person rather than actually what do the other candidates think about who went through this process. But I just think it's kind of our industry setting itself up for this kind of article, and I think that we just need to be much better at educating people in terms of what's going on and perhaps some of the great work that may sit behind this and the point of it, because I think that hiring and recruiting is just such an easy target, especially if you're putting AI into it, because then there's the whole suspicion that computers are making decisions, and there's not a kind of a strong sort of basis behind that. So this to me is a kind of a warning of the kind of press that might happen moving forward, and I think it's really important that we are so much better educating people in terms of what's going on and how things are going to change and how what the benefits are, particularly people who are not taking who are not going through that process at the moment and might not realize why it was better than the old process, for example.
Yeah, that's great. And I love it that you have that viewpoint. I'm an assessment guy. That's what I've been doing for like 30 years. I look at talent acquisition as a holistic thing, but this is what I specialize in a pretty deep way. So what I can tell you is that I think assessments are good, but I think the article has a very, very valid point when it comes to what that assessment looks like. I know as a job applicant, if I saw those creepy blue things, and then I looked at it and I'm like, I wouldn't even know how to tell if one of those is like me or not. I think the execution here is really poor. I am shocked that a company would use something like that. I mean, look, nobody likes taking tests. I'm a test guy. Anything you can do to make it more engaging and entertaining, yes. Tests can have bias, so this is obviously in the positive column, an attempt to mitigate any bias by looking at something and saying, if it's me, not me, and there's any cues as to race, ethnicity, gender, etc., that's going to contaminate things. So I totally understand this. When the criticism of efficacy about the science, I will tell you this: there is a lot of very good science behind this stuff. There's a lot of direct, crappy science behind this stuff. I don't know enough to know, looking at this, what category it falls into. To me, we have a thing in my field called face validity, and that is, does the test or the hiring process look like the job? Can I make a connection in my mind that I'm being asked something relevant to the job? I don't see that here, and if I were consulting to an organization, I would never, ever let them use that assessment. If you're just after big five traits, there's a billion assessments that do that, and it's the most common thing that gets measured in my research. So as far as, I think, again, it's hard in this take it or leave it to separate the concept necessarily from the from the article. You did a great job of doing that last time, so you lead here and tell me if you take it or leave it on this one. Any way you want it. You do it any way you want it.
Again, it's kind of hard because I was very much leave it, but having listened to what you've just said there, that's kind of really interesting. So I think that, and obviously the basis that I think this is a great example of how as an industry, we need to be much better at talking about what we're doing, I am going to even more begrudgingly take it.
Yeah, good. So what I would say is I get to make the rules. It's my show, but what I would say is I'm gonna give it a thumbs up for the article, but I'm gonna give it a thumbs down for the assessment itself. I feel like people need to know that that assessment is not a thing that I would want someone to use as an expert. So I will go thumbs down on that part, but I think the article's doing a good job. I don't like how it says, questioning the scientific basis, but that's actually legitimate. So I'm going to give it one of these for the actual stuff, and then I'm going to give it some applause too. So that's pretty much it. And the funnest part here is I'm going to send all the way to Scotland the Take It or Leave It show t-shirt. I don't know if that's actually showing up on camera. So let's go back to this, right? So here's, if you want to be on the podcast, here you go. We got a nice t-shirt for you to reward our guests. So yeah, that was fun, man. It went almost flawlessly as far as the text goes. So I'm happy about that. And let's just kind of start, moving into the future and wrapping this thing up a little bit. What's your take? What's the workplace? What's talent acquisition going to look like in 2034?
Yeah, 2034. So I think that I think it will have fundamentally changed. I think if you look back at 2014 and forward to 2024, you could say, well, actually, not much has actually shifted. I think it is going to shift this time. I think we're going to see some dramatic change. I think there's sort of two scenarios here, and I'm going to go with the optimistic one. So you can see a scenario where actually things might get worse. We might have, more bias in the recruitment process because of bad technology decisions. We might have a worse candidate experience because of badly implemented automation, those kind of things. However, I'm going to be more positive. I think that the technology coming in, I think that we could see a better candidate experience with candidates getting more transparency, more information, more efficiency. It's not being bogged down by humans not responding to stuff or doing stuff. So I think that's one thing if it's designed really well. And I would hope that we've really made that progress with skills and skills-based hiring, and that facilitates, along with the job seekers breaking the systems, that facilitates the changes in the recruitment process that just makes hiring fairer, more equitable, and that kind of stuff. And I think what I'd be really excited about is if we could crack that skills thing, that it means that it makes it easier for people to move between occupations and move between disciplines based on the skills that they've got. I think that's better for society. I think that's better for employers, and I think that's better for everyone. So I would hope that that's where we got to in 10 years' time in terms of just being able for people to get the job that they're going to be really good at. So I'm taking that optimistic view. I'm thinking there's going to be a lot of change, and that's going to be the sort of general direction that we go in.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so I'm going to put my 2034 glasses on here. This is what my glasses will look like in 2034, and they're not prescription, so you're a little fuzzy, but that's all right. So I think that mobility for people to find a job that they're good at is going to be greatly increased. I think that there's going to be a lot of regulation that, in my mind, honestly, I'm optimistic that things like the EUAI Act and having to certify where your training data came from and all this stuff is going to help. I truly believe that AI can remove bias when trained properly, because humans have bias probably, and that's how this stuff was trained. But I firmly believe you can debias these things as well to be more objective. So I think we're going to find that, and I think it might be regulatory pressure that helps provide that. Now, thinking that things will be more transparent is hard, just because as these neural networks and all these things are working get more and more and more complex, it's going to be harder to know that. So we're going to be needing to look at the
Yeah.
output, the ends justify the means kind of thing. I think it's going to be a lot more of a fluid process that happens a lot faster. I love tech gadgets. So I have the Ray-Ban Meta glasses, and I've talked about them on this show. You can look at stuff and ask them, what am I looking at? And they'll tell you through the little speakers. They don't have AR in them yet, but they will in probably the next year, the newest version. I can imagine a time when I'm actually interviewing a candidate, maybe face to face, and these things are giving me listening and giving me probing questions and helping me. I talked to somebody about that, and they said, yeah, but the candidate's going to be wearing them too, and they're going to be getting prompted on how to answer. And so I do think
That is
we might
very
have
true. Yeah.
yeah, we might have our personal agents interviewing other personal agents, but I just feel like we're going to have better resolution on who someone is and what's required in the job, more fluidity to move between those things. If I didn't think about what the hard part's going to be, and while I'm talking about it, I'm going to give you the luxury of a few minutes to think about it. So what are the biggest challenges in hiring going to be in 2034? I don't believe it's going to be that technology has completely replaced workers of every sort. I think that there will be a replacement of some of this stuff, but if you look back to the Luddites and the first industrial revolution, it created more jobs. Now, granted, there were no factories of any sort, so there was a lot of open space then, but I guess I have to be a little optimistic about that. So what am I pessimistic about? I think it's going to be a challenge to keep people in jobs. I think people are going to be functioning way more as independent agents. So as an individual, I like that. As an organization, that might be hard for me. I might be constantly hiring and bringing people in. I might be having to deal with fractional people. I might have to deal with the fact that there's a huge shortage of talent because people can go into business for themselves so much easier. Maybe that'll be backfilled by robots. I have no idea. So for me, it's actually about the employee population and who they are and managing that off the cuff, because I didn't even have this question in my notes. I just thought of it. So what do you think?
I would agree with you there. I think that there are two things that are already baked in for 10 years' time. So, there's not much you can be certain about what's going to happen in 10 years' time, but there's two things that we can be. So, first of all, in the US and Europe, we have aging populations. So, there are lots of other countries around the world that have much younger populations. So, we could see a shift in terms of labor and talent and all those kind of things. Now, what's technology going to do to fill the gap there? That's a kind of an unknown.
Yeah.
But it's very likely we're going to have talent shortages because of that. And I think the other thing is, if we're thinking about 2034, everyone who's going to be in the workforce in 2034 is either already in the workforce or they're currently in the education system.
Yep.
And speaking as a parent of an 8-year-old, I think if you look at the education system and what what it's currently teaching people in a lot of countries, not every country, there is not the skills for the future. The young people coming through aren't being equipped with the skills that maybe they're going to need when they enter the workforce in 10 years' time. So I think that we've got a talent and skills problem that is really, really baked in, and people need to be thinking about that right now.
Yeah. So I have a 10-year-old. I would say that watching obnoxious people scream on YouTube is not a future skill, but my 10-year-old seems to spend a lot of time doing that. And I think, I was going to ask you, once you said that, he or she, do they know do they talk about what they might want to be when they grow up, or an occupation? Is there any of that going on?
Yeah, computer games designer.
Oh, nice.
He went from a fireman, he went from a firefighter to a computer game designer kind of overnight. So yeah, and I think it's interesting as well, because there is a big thing about YouTube and TikTok and how people consume media and how that changes everything. But also, a lot of it is people screaming at each other that I don't understand. But also, there's so much knowledge that comes across in those things as well. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, my child was never fireman. Plays a lot of video games. He's really into birds. So if anything, I think he'd want to be like a bird scientist or something. But here's what I do this a lot. I'll come into the room and he's watching again, some guy screaming. I've actually seen a few of those that are pretty entertaining, but the watching people play video games is puzzles me. But what I'll do is grab the remote and say, "Let's learn about something," and I'll go
Yeah,
find a subject and we'll watch some videos about that subject. He doesn't default to that, but I'm trying to
yeah.
demonstrate that there's a lot out there on YouTube that is instructional for people, and I feel like that is actually, I mean, come on. I love fixing things. I've been able to fix all kind of stuff. There's no way I'd be able to figure that out by watching, all the stuff on YouTube. It's a true revolutionary thing. And I just was reading that, I don't know if it's OpenAI or one of the large language models, they actually now have started to transcribe the entire YouTube content to train their models. So they're actually taking the videos, transcribing
Wow,
them, and putting them into the model. So there's
that's
going to be a lot more knowledge,
that's
going on there.
that's terrifying.
It is. It's terrifying
That
on
is
the
terrifying.
shouting part. So awesome
Yeah,
conversation today. Thanks for being the guinea pig on the Take It or Leave It show. We'll get you to send me your address, and I'll get you a shirt. But anything you want to leave our guests with? How I think it's obvious how they can follow you, but give yourself a plug for your awesome podcast, and let's hope some of our listeners and viewers are going to tune into that.
yeah, absolutely. So anyone wants to connect with me, I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn. And you can find Recruiting Future, my podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And also on the website, recruitingfuture.com, there's a kind of an archive of 600 episodes that are searchable by their content. So a great resource for looking into some of the topics that we've been talking about.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. You've been an awesome guest all the way from close to Edinburgh, Scotland, and it's a sunny day there, so that I'm sure makes you pretty happy.
Excellent. Thank
Cheers.
you very much.
Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. I want to encourage all the listeners out there to share this podcast with their friends, families, colleagues. People don't find podcasts just randomly typically. They do so at the recommendations of others that they trust and, people who've really enjoyed that content and want to share. And I certainly sincerely hope you've enjoyed the content of this episode and the others like it, and encourage you to please share with your friends, family, and coworkers. Let them know about this podcast and what we have to offer. They're going to definitely walk away smarter, sharper, and thinking about some really interesting issues, which is what we all want, right? Thank you very much. Until next time.